So for the sake of this film, because I just want to get into the discussion of this film, we're just going to rate this first. And then if you just want to take our rating and just go see it, that's fine. You don't want to listen to the discussion. But we're going to rate this first, then we're going to talk about why we rated it the way that we did. All right? So are you ready?
Hang on, I have to remember. Okay.
Because we were practicing before, and we're just practicing with pass it. So if she says that, she doesn't mean it.
How do you know? You don't know.
But we'll see.
Okay.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. See it!
A neighborhood was a place where, at times that you felt worried, scared, unsafe, would take care of you.
He had a singular vision of kindness and love.
Love is at the root of everything. All learning, all relationships, love or the lack of it. Children have very deep feelings, just the way everybody does. There must be times when you do feel blue. I'm not feeling blue right now, though.
Me neither.
All right, so before we get started, just a word of warning. This is going to be a longer take. I know this is 10-minute takes, but this one's going to run closer to 20 minutes. There's a lot to unpack with this, and this is a documentary that you both really liked, and we would just want to go through a discussion instead of just rating this. And so, let's begin.
A television program for children made its unauspicious debut on station WQED in Pittsburgh. Its host, Fred Rodgers.
Mr. Rogers?
Yeah.
I want to tell you something.
What would you like to tell
I like you.
I like you, my dear. Thank you very much for telling me that.
Won't You Be My Neighbor? It is the documentary about Fred Rodgers. And if you did not grow up watching Fred Rodgers, that's okay. You can go into this documentary cold. It's one of the reasons why it's a see it for me. I want to break this film down into like 3 things that it did. And it's the emotions it made me feel. So for me, it made me happy, it made me sad, and it made me angry.
Now, were you mad about the film, or were you mad about the content?
not the film's content in the film. And we'll talk about it. We'll break it down. The first emotion is happiness, because this film, notes I was jotting down today, it's like I felt like it was 80% happy stuff.
It's like his show. His show is very happy. There's not a moment in his show that you're going to be... I mean, never mind. Keep going.
No, but you're right. His show is about happiness. It's about making a difference in kids' lives, and he did that.
His show is about talking about sticky situations and hitting them head on. Like, he'd talk about divorce, he'd talk about war, he'd talk about death. He's talking about things that parents don't want to talk to their children about, and he said it in a way that was fun and caring and loving. And that was his show.
And the thing that actually pleasantly surprised me about this film, I don't know if you knew this. I had no idea. I didn't know his film went back to 1968 as a private show that aired in Pittsburgh. It was black and white.
I knew that. I knew that the reason that PBS even continued showing educational programs was because of Rodgers. But that's also because, as an educator, we learned about that in school. Yeah,
when we walked out of the theater, there was like a lot of scenes that really hit me about this, and you're like, yeah, well, I've already seen these. Them all. I've seen all these scenes, so they didn't hit me that much. But for me, seeing those early beginnings was amazing, because from big things come from small beginnings. That's a common theme with a lot of films that we see. And Fred Rodgers is literally the epitome of big things coming from small beginnings. And I think one of the happiest moments of this film for me happened pretty early on, and it's the court trials that the government came in and wanted to take the $20 million away from PBS and said, we're going to shut you down. We don't want you to make these channels.
It was especially geared toward educational programs, and they didn't like the way that he was.
Well, was it him? It was PBS.
Oh,
it
was PBS
whole.
In general. Okay, my mistake.
So PBS as a whole, they were just like, we're going to take all your funding away. And before they got to Fred Rodgers in the hearings for the battle for $20 million, they had 3 days of other people.
So they were over it. They didn't want to hear anything. They
were done with. They wanted to give it all. They just wanted to take it all away. And what follows when Fred Rodgers come on is the scene that everyone has seen.
This is a philosophical statement and would take about 10 minutes to read, so I'll not do that. One of the first things that a child learns in a healthy family is trust. And I trust what you have said that you will read this. It's very important to me. I care deeply about children. My first children...
Will it make you happy if you read it?
I'd just like to talk about it, if it's all right.
Sir. Okay.
My first children's program was on WQED 15 years ago.
He talks to the senator or the governor, which
he talks to
the kids, and he starts singing them the songs, the message of the show, and by the end of it, the senator guy is just like, "All right, I think you guys just won your $20 million," and then from there, it just took off. Yeah. We then transitioned from the black and white period of Fred Rodgers, which I never saw, into the color version of Fred Rodgers, or Fred Rodgers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which is what I grew up on. I watched some of those episodes.
I watched some of them too, and I remembered watching them, but I couldn't. I don't think I watched.
I specifically remember the one that got me was when he walks in the apartment, he starts feeding the fish, and I specifically always remember his episodes when we would go in. Goes, "All right, now it's time to feed the fish," and he would just sprinkle fish food across the top of his tank. And one of the things that was also very, very that made me very happy about this film was the soundtrack and the score. The score was fantastic. I listened to it probably 3 times today because I sit at yes, I just had it on repeat. I sit at a desk and I'm an editor, and I'm allowed to listen to music at work while I edit, and I put on the soundtrack, and the soundtrack is a really quick listen. There's one song on the soundtrack that is over 2 minutes. Everything else is from a minute 20 to like a minute 45, and there's 15 songs, so it's a relatively quick listen.
Yeah.
But one of the scenes that hits me pretty hard in this film is one of the best songs on the score, and I actually want to play that song, but the specific scene is when someone in some other city says, "Hey, let's bring Mr. Rogers and have a Mr. Rogers Day in here," and they're like, "Mr. Rogers, who's that?" And like they don't know who he is. Like, let's have a Mr. Rogers Day, and then the town reluctantly says, "Okay, fine, let's do that." And then when he comes into town, there's just a line around the block for Mr. Rogers Day for parents and families to hang out with Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
And the song that plays, the song is called Mr. Rogers Day.
And
the soundtrack.
The kid asked, "How did you get out of the TV?"
How did you get out of the TV here? And he explained to him how he did it. And he goes, "How are you going to get back in?" But the song is called Mr. Rogers Day. The soundtrack is by Jonathan Kirksey. Not familiar with his work. This album had a sort of a March of the Penguins type of vibe to it. And I really like March of the Penguins soundtrack as well. And if anyone watching this, if you guys have recommendations for soundtracks for me to listen to that's in this vein as well, go ahead and let me know. I'll listen to them. I got all day to listen to scores. I listen to a musical score almost every single day. So yesterday was Avengers Infinity War. I went through that one. But this is the second half of Mr. Rogers Day. Just listen to this. It's a fantastic song. We're just going to sit and listen. And then what we just did after the song there was another part about this film that I actually really, really liked. And Fred Rodgers had something in his program dedicated to just silence. He would just sit there. He would literally just put a timer down and he would just set it for 1 minute and he would just sit in silence. Like, this is how long 1 minute is.
Well, he would give those showing kids what a minute was, but he just had long pauses and long takes. Like there were so many moments on his show where he just would pause and stop.
And the beauty of that is that he knew that silence was a beautiful thing. The world is filled with a lot of noise, and he just wanted to give the people watching his program a moment of silence to take away the noise. And that's a lot of what his program was, to get people away from the noise of the world, to bring happiness to them. Which now brings me to the sort of sad part. Not that his message was sad, But what he was combating was sad. His point was that he wanted to create counter-programming for children that was smart and educational, because of the rest of the world just looked at children as future consumers. That's what the world was looking at children as. How soon can we get children to start buying our products? And Fred Rodgers says, no, you are important to all of us. It's not just if you can be a consumer, you are an important person from the time you're born until the time that you pass away.
There's a moment in the movie that really hit me was when they were talking about, they were in a courtroom and they were talking about how TV can be used as such a tool for positive news, positive information for people to look at as a tool to know about the positive things in the world. And it's used right now in such a negative way that I think they're right. I think TV, they warned us in the beginning that TV, if it's used wrong or improperly, it's going to have negative effects on people. And honestly, I look at all of us. We're always on our phones. We're always on our TV. Even before I admit it too, even before I go to bed, I play a game or two. And then all of a sudden it's past midnight and I'm grumpy in the morning because I'm not taking the time to just take a deep breath and go to sleep and do what you need to do. I think that was the message in that point of what you were saying, is that TV it could have been a tool that could be used for good, and I think it's just not.
And the other thing that was sad to me is that there's early on in the Fred Rodgers show, there was a cast member that they found out was gay. And they told that cast member that he could no longer go to the gay bars he was visiting, because if the world found out that there was a gay man that worked on the show, they would have to fire him because it would look bad on the show, and they're afraid that they would lose all their sponsors. Now, eventually Fred Rodgers came around to this guy, but it took a little while. But that was also an incredibly, and it just wasn't Fred Rodgers, it's just a sign of the times. That's how it was in the 60s and 70s. Like, gay culture was not accepted the way it is today.
That was the reason why he started his show. And we were talking about this after. We need a Mr. Rogers right now.
Yeah, no,
we need him back.
We need a Mr. Rogers, because, especially with me working in the political landscape, that I just see every day, just people yelling at each other, constant arguments. No one agrees with anything. There is no love with anything that I see on a day-to-day basis.
I come from the opposite spectrum where I work with children. So I don't get this. I don't see that, but I see what I could be as an adult figure to children. And that's what this movie made me realize, is I could be such an amazing adult figure for children. And that's what he was about. He didn't want anything except for being a good role model. All he wanted in his life. And he was successful at it.
And now, at the very end of Mr. Rogers' run is where I started to get angry. Not with Mr. Rogers himself, but
with the world.
When Mr. Rogers was at the end of his run with his show, the news stations and people around the world, for whatever reason, turned against him and started blaming him for the entitlement culture that we have. Yeah. And I wanted to reach through the screen and start hitting those news anchors and going, what are you talking about? Because the whole message is, I mean, they took his message and completely contorted it. His message is that no matter how bad you feel, you are a special person that deserves to be loved, and I am going to love you. It's not that you are special and you deserve everything the world has to offer. It is that I know you feel down sometimes. It's okay that you feel down, but just know that even though you feel down, you are still loved. And the other part that made me really angry was the protesters. You remember the protesters?
Oh, yeah.
They were protesting for whatever reason. This group of people thought he was gay, and they held up signs, "This F is burning in hell." And it was adults with their very young 6, 7-year-old children holding these signs up. And it was disgusting imagery that we saw. We saw the pictures. They had the pictures there with Mr. Rogers' name on it. And it was...
You can find them.
Yeah, you can find them, and it made me very, very angry when I saw that. But at the same time, it is also a part of Mr. Rogers' story. But it just made me mad that people even thought that way when there's no allegations against the guy. It's just people thought he had weird mannerisms, so they just took it to an extreme.
Right, but he's in a public eye. He's going to eventually he's going to get some backlash. It doesn't matter what public eye you're in. I think every single person that's in the public eye gets that sometimes, whether it's Mr. Rogers or anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the curse of having fame, is you just have to accept it.
All right, before I have my final sign off, do you have any final thoughts with the film?
We need him another Mr. Rogers.
Now, with my final thought is that Mr. Rogers, his whole message can be brought down to one small set of numbers. He had one character that was a tiger that had an address. It was one small set of numbers. His address was 143. 143 means, where 1 means one letter, 1 is I. 4 is 4 letters, means Love, love. 3 is 3 letters, YOU. Mr. Rogers' message for every kid, every family, every person in the world needs 143 in their life. And we need something that we all have, something that we're thankful for. And 143 is a part of that message. Now, I actually just going to show the I just want to show the epitome of this message and what it means. So,
what are you doing?
What am I doing?
No.
I love you.
I love you too.
Thank you.